You already know the answer. Every player on that field knew it. Every coach in both dugouts knew it. The 40,000 people in the stands knew it. And the first baseman for the Atlanta Braves knew it too, which is what made what he did in the fifth inning so shocking that the stadium fell into the kind of silence that only arrives when something has happened that nobody has a ready response for. He pushed Shohei Ohtani down. Not a collision. Not an accidental contact in the chaos of a bang-bang play where two athletes moving at full speed arrive at the same piece of ground simultaneously. Not the kind of incidental physical contact that baseball absorbs and moves past without ceremony. This was something deliberate. Something brutal in its directness. A push, forceful, targeted, and aimed at a man who was not expecting it because nothing in the professional code of conduct that governs a Major League Baseball game had prepared him for it. Ohtani went down. And in the 3 seconds that followed, 3 seconds in which the stadium processed what it had just witnessed, in which players on both sides of the field stopped moving, in which the broadcast cameras found the moment and held it, the Atlanta Braves' first baseman's career was altered permanently by a decision that cannot be walked back, cannot be reframed, and cannot be explained away. The ejection came quickly. But not quickly enough to undo what had already happened on that baseline in the fifth inning of a game that nobody who was there will ever fully forget. To understand the weight of what the Braves' first baseman did, you have to understand the specific geography and language of a first base interaction in baseball. First base is a meeting point. It is where a hitter arrives after a hit or a walk, where a first baseman receives throws and holds runners, where two players from opposing teams spend more time in close physical proximity than almost anywhere else on the field. The unwritten rules that govern first base interactions are among the most consistently observed in the sport. Players talk there. They share jokes sometimes. They acknowledge each other's humanity in the middle of a competition that is otherwise entirely adversarial. Physical aggression at first base, the kind that is intentional, the kind that targets rather than accidentally contacts, is among the rarest and most condemned acts in the professional game. Because the baseline is a space of proximity and relative vulnerability. A runner arriving at first base is not in a defensive posture. He is completing an offensive action. He is arriving, not bracing. The Braves' first baseman understood all of this. And in the fifth inning, with Ohtani arriving at first base in the aftermath of a play, he made a decision that violated every dimension of the code that governs that space. He planted. He turned. And he pushed Ohtani with a force and an intentionality that removed any possibility of the contact being accidental. Ohtani went down. The reaction was not immediate in the way that reactions to brawls are immediate, the rushing of bodies, the shouting, the chaotic convergence of players from both dugouts that baseball fights produce. This was different. This was a stunned collective pause that lasted just long enough for everyone present to confirm what they had seen with their own eyes. Then everything moved at once. Players from the Dodgers dugout were on the field before the coaching staff could direct them. The umpires were moving toward the baseline with the urgent purposefulness of officials who understand that what has just occurred requires immediate intervention. The Braves' dugout was in motion too, not in support of what their first baseman had done, but in the reflexive response of players who understand that the situation has just become something larger than a single play. Ohtani rose. This, too, was captured by every camera present, the moment he pushed himself up from the ground, the moment he stood, the moment his expression registered to those watching as something that sat between disbelief and a controlled fury that he was visibly working to contain. He did not retaliate. He did not move toward the first baseman with the aggression that the push had invited. He stood, and he steadied himself, and he allowed the situation to be handled by the people whose job it is to handle situations like this. This restraint, this decision, made in real time under circumstances that would have justified a very different response, is one of the most revealing things about who Ohtani is. Because the push was not ambiguous. It was not something he needed to evaluate or contextualize. He knew exactly what had happened to him. And he chose, in that moment, to trust the game's mechanisms rather than his own immediate anger. The first baseman was ejected. The umpires did not deliberate. They did not gather for a lengthy conference or review footage or weigh competing accounts of what had occurred. They saw what 40,000 people in the stands and every camera in the stadium had seen. The ejection was immediate and unambiguous, a consequence delivered with the speed and certainty that the clarity of the offense demanded. Why? That single word filled the dugouts, the press box, the broadcast booth, and the stands in the immediate aftermath of the ejection. Not why was he ejected, that required no explanation. But why did he do it? What sequence of thoughts, frustrations, competitive pressures, or personal decisions led a professional baseball player to push Shohei Ohtani down at first base in the fifth inning of a regular season game? The answers that emerged in the hours following the incident were incomplete because the only complete answer lives inside the first baseman himself. But the accounts from players and coaches who were present pointed consistently toward something that had been building before that moment arrived, a frustration with how the game was going, a competitive temperature that had been climbing since the early innings, and a specific irritation directed at Ohtani's presence and impact on the game that had accumulated to a point where judgment failed entirely. This is not an excuse. Nothing that happened before the fifth inning justifies what happened in it. But it is an explanation of the kind that baseball people recognize, the slow accumulation of competitive pressure until a player makes a decision that his sober self would never make and his professional self cannot survive without consequence. The first baseman, in crossing that line, did not just harm Ohtani. He harmed his own team, his own season, and his own standing in a game that has a long and specific memory for this kind of transgression. There is a practical dimension to this and there is a symbolic dimension, and both of them matter. The practical dimension is straightforward. Ohtani is the most valuable player in Major League Baseball by almost any measure available, by contract, by performance, by the global audience his presence generates, by the competitive impact he has on every game he participates in. Placing him at physical risk through an intentional act of aggression is not simply a violation of sportsmanship. It is a threat to something the league has a direct and significant interest in protecting. The symbolic dimension runs deeper. Because Ohtani is not just valuable in the transactional sense. He represents something about what baseball is becoming, a truly global sport, carrying audiences and cultures and traditions that extend far beyond the American geography where the game was born. The fans who watch him come from everywhere. The meaning they attach to him is not only about baseball. It is about what it feels like to watch someone from your part of the world operate at the absolute peak of something the entire world is watching. When the Braves' first baseman pushed him down, those fans watched it happen. In Japan, where it was already early morning, the footage arrived before people had finished breakfast. The reaction was not filtered through baseball's analytical frameworks, through ERA and OPS and defensive metrics. It was the reaction of people watching someone they care about being treated with deliberate physical disrespect. That is not a small thing. And the league's response, the speed of the ejection, the certainty of the subsequent review, reflected an understanding of exactly how large that thing is. In the press conference that followed, Ohtani spoke carefully. He described what had happened without dramatizing it. He acknowledged the physicality of the push without performing victimhood. He expressed something that was neither forgiveness nor condemnation, a measured acknowledgement that what occurred was wrong, delivered by a man who had already decided that his energy was better spent on preparation for the next game than on extending the narrative of this one. His teammates were less restrained in their private assessments. The accounts that emerged from the clubhouse in the hours following the game described a unified anger, not the hot, immediate anger of the incident itself, but the colder and more durable anger of people who had watched something happen to someone they respect and are still processing what it means. Freddie Freeman, who has become one of the most reliable voices in the Dodgers clubhouse for moments that require honest public response, did not need many words. He said what everyone who had been on that field already knew, that what the Braves' first baseman did was unacceptable, that Ohtani had handled it with a grace that the situation did not require of him, and that the ejection was the correct and only possible response to what had occurred. Baseball is relentless in this way. The ejection happened. The pause happened. The shock settled into the specific discomfort of a game that must resume even when resuming feels inadequate to what has just occurred. The Braves played the remainder of the game without their first baseman. The Dodgers played with the knowledge of what had happened to one of their own still present in the dugout, not interfering with the baseball, because professional athletes have an extraordinary capacity to compartmentalize, but present nonetheless. Ohtani returned to his position. He completed his at-bats. He moved through the remainder of the game with the focused discipline that defines how he responds to everything that threatens to pull him out of his own process. The first baseman's ejection is now part of the record. The push is part of the record. The image of Ohtani going down and rising again, choosing composure over retaliation in a moment that would have justified either, is part of the record. And somewhere in the distance between what the first baseman chose to do and how Ohtani chose to respond, the truest statement about both men was made without a single word being spoken.